For every woman who has ever been made to feel like a second choice, this is a story of redemption, revenge, and a love powerful enough to rebuild from the ashes. Praenarin, Rin made the wrong choice. Haunted by the memory of their last fight, she lives in a world of regret, knowing her inability to sever ties with a toxic ex cost her the love of her life, Khemjira, Khem. For 6 agonizing months, Rin has been a ghost in her own life, convinced Khem has vanished forever. But when a guilty conscience and a tip from her regretful father finally leads Rin to Khem, she doesn't find a woman pining in solitude. She finds a queen. Khem has transformed her heartbreak into an empire. She is the confident, powerful owner of a thriving art gallery, a self-made woman who built a fortress of success to ensure she would never again be hurt. This Khem doesn't need saving. She doesn't need Rin's apologies, and she certainly doesn't need to be reminded of the woman who shattered her heart. Forced together by a violent storm that threatens to destroy everything Khem has built, old sparks are rekindled amidst the chaos. The fragile hope of a second chance begins to bloom in the dark. But just when Rin believes she can earn back Khem's trust, the ghost from her past calls again, forcing her to face the ultimate test. To win back the love of her life, Rin must do more than just apologize. She must burn her old world to the ground. But in a world where Khem holds all the power, will even the ultimate sacrifice be enough to earn a love that was once so easily denied? From the world of denied love, The Last Phone Call is a gripping, angsty, and ultimately triumphant romance about 2 women fighting for a future, proving that the hottest fires are forged in the deepest heartbreaks. The Last Phone Call, Chapter 1, The Ghost of You. 6 months, 182 days, 4,368 hours. I am a woman who deals in numbers, in projections and returns on investment, and I have calculated the loss of Khem down to the precise, agonizing second. It does nothing to diminish the debt. My apartment, once our shared sanctuary, is now a sterile testament to my failure. It smells of nothing. Not the phantom scent of jasmine tea Khem used to brew, not the sharp, earthy smell of the clay she'd bring home from her pottery studio. It smells only of glass cleaner and the crushing absence of her. Every morning, the sun spills across the polished teak floors, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silence where her laughter used to be. It is a beautiful, expensive, and exquisitely lonely prison. My phone sits on the granite countertop, dark and silent. I treat it like an unexploded bomb. In a way, it is. It's the weapon I use to detonate my own life. I can still feel the weight of it in my hand that last night. The cool, smooth case a stark contrast to the fire in Khem's eyes. She called you again, didn't she? Khem's voice wasn't loud, that was the worst part. It was quiet, frayed, worn down to the last thread. She stood by the window overlooking the city lights, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were the only thing holding her together. Khem, it wasn't like that, I'd said, the pathetic mantra of the guilty. Pim was just having a crisis. There is always a crisis, Rin. She whispered to the glass. And you are always the hero. But who is the hero for us? Who saves us when you're busy saving her? I had no answer, because she was right. My loyalty, my misguided sense of responsibility to a past I refused to bury, was a poison. I offered Khem a future with one hand while keeping the other firmly clasped with a ghost. I told myself it was kindness, decency. Looking back from the desolate vantage point of this empty apartment, I can see it for what it was. Cowardice, pure and simple. I didn't have the courage to make the last phone call, the one that said goodbye for good, And in failing to do so, I forced Kim to make hers. The phone on the counter buzzes, a violent, jarring sound that rips through the silence. My heart seizes, a conditioned response. For a wild, stupid moment, I think it's Kim. Hope, that cruel and idiotic weed, sprouts in the barren landscape of my chest. But the name on the screen is not hers. It's my father. We speak twice a week, a scheduled call to discuss corporate strategy, never matters of the heart. His timing is odd. I answer, my voice a dry rasp. Father. There's a pause, a weighty silence that feels entirely out of character for him. Praenarin, he says, and the use of my full name sends a chill down my spine. His voice isn't the crisp, authoritative tone of a CEO. It's heavy, laced with something I haven't heard in years. Regret. He cuts straight to the point. I made some inquiries. I know where she is.
Chapter 2. A Father's Regretful Push. The words hung in the sterile air of my apartment, a three-pronged hook snagging my past, present, and the ghost of a future. I know where she is. My knuckles were white where I gripped the phone. For 6 months, Khem had been a phantom, a ghost who lived only in the echoes of my memory. Now, my father, the cartographer of my corporate life, was telling me he had put a pin in her map. The idea was so terrifying, so profoundly hopeful, that I couldn't form a single word in response. "I'm coming over," he said into my silence, and the line went dead. 20 minutes later, the doorbell chimed. I hadn't moved from the spot, my entire world having shrunk to the possibility contained in that one sentence. I opened the door to a man I barely recognized. It was my father, of course, wearing his immaculate navy suit and the weight of our family's company like a second skin. But the usual sharpness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow that seemed to pull at the corners of his face. For the first time, he looked less like a CEO and more like a father who had misplaced something precious. He walked past me, his gaze sweeping over the minimalist living room. He noted the bare walls where Khem's vibrant art once hung, the cold glass coffee table that had replaced her warm, hand-carved wooden one. He didn't need to say a word. The verdict was written in the slight downturn of his lips. This is no way to live. He sat on the edge of the pristine white sofa, looking deeply uncomfortable in the joyless space I had curated. "I should have done this sooner," he began, his voice quiet. "I watched you wither. I saw you walking through the office like a ghost." He finally met my eyes, and the regret I saw there was a mirror of my own. "I confess my only thought was for the company, for your focus. I never once thought about your heart." The confession stunned me into silence. "I saw what was happening," he continued, his voice thick with a strange new emotion. "I saw how your loyalty to your past was poisoning your future. I warned you that you couldn't keep one foot in another life and expect Khem to wait forever." He shook his head, a gesture of self-reproach. "My warnings were too soft. Business advice, not a father's plea. I should have been stronger with you. For you." From his briefcase, he pulled out a simple manila file. It had no label. He placed it on the glass table between us. The soft thud was the loudest sound in the room. "I hired a private investigator, not to meddle, not to interfere, but because I believe every person deserves one final chance to fix their biggest mistake. What you do with this information is your decision entirely." He stood, his duty done. "Don't let pride or fear be the reason you live the rest of your life in this empty room, Praenarin." He left as quietly as he had arrived, the click of the closing door sealing me inside with the choice he had delivered. For a long time, I just stared at the file. It was a key. It was a weapon. It was a bridge to a world I had burned, sitting right there on the cold, empty glass. My hand, trembling slightly, hovered over it. Chapter 3. The First Step. My apartment keys felt foreign in my hand, their jagged edges pressing into my palm. I grabbed nothing else. No change of clothes, no toothbrush, only the manila file my father had left behind. It lay on the passenger seat like a sacred text, its contents still a mystery. I didn't need to open it. The only address that mattered was the final one, the destination. To look at the details felt like a violation, a continuation of the same entitled behavior that had cost me everything. I would find my own way. The engine of my coupe turned over with a low, throaty growl, a sound of dormant power awakened. As I pulled out of the sterile underground garage and into the familiar chaos of Bangkok, the city skyline felt like a cage I was finally rattling. Each skyscraper was a monument to the life I was supposed to want, the legacy I was supposed to protect, the life that had chewed Khem up and spat her out. The drive was a blur of motion and memory. The concrete jungle bled into sprawling suburbs, then into the vibrant green of rice paddies stretching to the horizon. With every kilometer I put between myself and my apartment, the silence in the car grew heavier, filled only by the hum of the tires on asphalt and the relentless playback of my own failures. There is always a crisis, Rin, and you are always the hero. Khem's words echoed in my head, a quiet, damning indictment. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles aching. Shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that started in my chest and spread through my limbs. I'd worn my loyalty to Pim, my ex, like a medal of honor, proof that I was a good, decent person who didn't abandon people. But it was a lie. It was a selfish, cowardly act, and the person I had truly abandoned was Khem, the one person who had never asked me to save her, only to love her, fully, without reservation. Hours passed. The landscape shifted again, the air growing thick and humid, laced with the first tantalizing scent of salt. My terrifying hope began to war with the shame. What would I even say? Sorry was a pathetic, weightless word for the damage I had caused. I've changed was a promise I had already broken. I had to prove it. The thought was a lightning strike of clarity. It wasn't about finding the right words. It was about performing the right actions. I didn't know what those actions were yet, but I knew I had to be ready to do anything, sacrifice anything, to show her that the Rin who let her walk away was gone for good. A blue sign with white lettering appeared on the side of the road, welcoming me to Praenarin. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The town was quaint, a collection of low-slung buildings and vibrant market stalls. It felt a world away from the cold steel and glass I called home. It felt like a world Khem would choose. I followed the main road as it curved towards the sea, my breath held tight in my chest, and then I saw it. On a corner overlooking the water, nestled between a sleepy cafe and a shop selling colorful textiles, was a building of modern, clean lines. A simple, elegant sign hung above the door, the lettering a work of art in itself. It didn't say art gallery. It said the Khemjira.
Chapter 4. The Khemjira Gallery. My mind had conjured 1,000 scenarios. Khem, gracefully sad, working in a quiet little shop. Khem, angry and hurt, refusing to see me. Khem, perhaps even struggling, a reality that would have given my guilt a selfish, heroic purpose. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for this. The gallery wasn't just a building, it was a statement. The glass frontage was vast and seamless, revealing an interior that was a masterclass in minimalist elegance. Light poured in, illuminating stark white walls, adorned with enormous, breathtaking canvases of color and emotion. A striking bronze sculpture of impossible delicacy held the center of the room. This wasn't a quaint coastal art shop. This was a serious, high-end gallery, the kind that graced the pages of architectural magazines and dictated the careers of emerging artists. The air inside, which I could feel even from the pavement, seemed to hum with importance. The scent of money, champagne, and oil paint drifted out as a patron exited. I felt a sudden sharp need to check my reflection. I,
Praenarin, who walked into boardrooms and commanded million-baht deals without a second thought, felt woefully and completely out of place. I was a ghost at a feast I didn't know was being held. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as my eyes scanned the crowd. It was a sophisticated mix of wealthy-looking Thais and international collectors, all murmuring in low, appreciative tones. And then I saw her. She wasn't tucked away in an office. She was the sun around which this entire universe orbited. Khem stood near the central sculpture, a flute of champagne held loosely in one hand. She was talking to an older European couple, her head tilted with an air of easy confidence. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut black silk jumpsuit that whispered of expense and impeccable taste. Her hair, which used to fall in a wild, artistic tumble, was styled in a sleek, elegant knot at the nape of her neck. She laughed at something the man said, a sound that was just as warm as I remembered, but now it carried a new timbre of authority, of effortless command. She wasn't healing. She wasn't surviving. She was reigning. She had built this world not just without me, but in defiance of me. This fortress of success was the ultimate declaration. I will never be a second choice again. I will be the only choice. As if she felt my stare, her conversation came to a close. She turned, her gaze sweeping across her domain with the proprietary air of a queen. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met mine. The warmth in her expression didn't fade. It was extinguished. The soft, smiling curve of her lips flattened into a perfectly polite, perfectly neutral line. The light in her eyes was shuttered, replaced by a cool, professional mask so impenetrable it took my breath away. It was a look of polite non-recognition, the kind you give a stranger who has bumped into you in a crowd. In that single, devastating moment, she erased 6 years of history. My carefully rehearsed apologies, my desperate pleas, all turned to ash in my mouth. I had come here to fix a broken heart. I now realized I was standing on the outside of a fortress Khem had built, not of brick and mortar, but of success. And its walls were a mile high.
Chapter 5. An Audience with the Queen. Taking a breath that did little to calm the frantic hummingbird in my chest, I pushed open the heavy glass door. The gallery's cool, quiet atmosphere enveloped me, a world away from the humid street. Khem was still occupied, so I moved towards her. My path, a slow, agonizing journey past art I couldn't see and people whose faces were a blur. Before I could get within 10 feet, a young woman with sharp eyes and a tablet held like a shield stepped gracefully into my path. "So estika?" she said, her smile polite but firm. "Can I help you?" The question threw me. I was used to being the one with assistance, the one whose path was cleared. I'm here to see Khemjira. Khemjira is currently with clients," the assistant said, her gaze unwavering. "Do you have an appointment?" The polite professional question was a slap in the face. "No," I admitted, the word tasting like defeat. "My name is Praenarin. Please just tell her I'm here." I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew the name. With a curt nod, she spoke quietly into a discreet earpiece. A moment later, Khem turned and began walking towards me. Her expression was perfectly neutral, her stride measured. She wasn't walking toward a lover from her past. She was walking toward an unexpected problem that needed to be managed. "Praenarin," she said, her voice smooth and cool, utterly devoid of warmth. "What a surprise." All the speeches I had rehearsed, all the carefully constructed apologies, evaporated. Under her glacial gaze, I stammered, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "I had to see you. I needed to apologize." She didn't acknowledge the word. She glanced at her watch, a gesture of dismissal so blatant that it made me flinch.
I'm afraid I'm rather busy. This is the opening reception for a very important artist. She paused, her eyes scanning my face as if assessing a risk. However, I believe in tying up loose ends. It's bad for business to leave things unresolved. The corporate language was a deliberate twist of the knife. If you require closure, she continued, her voice clinical, I can offer you dinner tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. My assistant will send you the details. It wasn't a question. It was a summons. Without waiting for a reply, she gave a curt dismissive nod and turned her back on me, melting seamlessly back into her role as the gracious host. Her assistant reappeared at my side. Your phone number, please? She asked. I numbly recited the digits, feeling as though I'd just been demoted from the love of her life to a line item on her weekly agenda.
Chapter 6. The Business of Forgiveness. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place I would have chosen for a corporate power dinner. Sleek, loud, and brutally fashionable. It was the last place I would have ever taken Khem. She was already there when I arrived, seated at a small table, scrolling through something on her phone. She looked up as I approached, her face a mask of polite neutrality. The small talk was excruciating. I tried to steer the conversation toward us, but she parried every attempt with effortless skill. Finally, I put my hands on the table. Khem, about what happened. She cut me off, not with anger, but with the crisp efficiency of a CEO redirecting a failing presentation. There's no need to relitigate the past, Praenarin. It was a partnership that was dissolved due to a fundamental conflict of interest, a poor emotional investment on my part. I flinched. She took a sip of water, then continued. I took my severance. Your offer was quite generous, I'll admit, and I treated it as seed capital. I drafted a 5-year business plan, conducted extensive market research on the regional art scene, and leveraged my contacts from my university days. The first year was difficult, of course. Cash flow was a constant concern, and there were significant risks involved in securing the initial collection on consignment. She spoke of her heartbreak and her struggle as if she were presenting a quarterly report. There were no tears, no accusations, just a cold, hard recitation of facts. I came here ready for anger, for sorrow, for anything but this. I was not prepared for a balance sheet of her success. She had taken the pain I'd caused her and turned it into profit. There was a lull in her monologue. She picked up her wine glass, her eyes sharp and analytical over the rim. I do wonder how you've been, though. It must be quieter for you now. She paused, letting the silence hang for a beat too long. I hope Pry is doing well. She must miss having you to call. The question landed with surgical precision. My blood ran cold. It was a test, a carefully calibrated probe to see if the wound was still infected. Any answer was a minefield. I opened my mouth, then closed it. We don't speak much, I finally managed, the words weak and unconvincing. Khem gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if she had just confirmed a hypothesis. I see. She placed her napkin on the table and signaled for the check. Closure, it seemed, had been achieved.
Chapter 7. A Glimpse from the Outside. I couldn't bring myself to leave town. Instead, I checked into a small, anonymous guest house and became a ghost, an observer of the life Khem had built. It was a unique and exquisite form of torture. From the cafe next door, I watched her through the gallery window. I saw her in a tense negotiation with a temperamental young artist, her posture radiating a calm authority that I had never seen before. She wasn't pleading or placating, she was leading. She made her points, listened to his, and by the end, he was shaking her hand, a look of respect on his face. One evening, I saw her hosting a private event for a group of silver-haired investors. Dressed in a stunning emerald green dress, she moved through the crowd with a dancer's grace, charming, laughing, and networking with a skill that would have made my father proud. She wasn't just an artist. She was a power player. The next morning, I watched her being interviewed by a crew from a Bangkok arts magazine. She posed for photos, confident and poised. During a break, the elderly woman who owned the textile shop next door brought her a bottle of water, patting her arm affectionately. The cafe owner waved, the delivery drivers all greeted her by name. I realized then, with a sinking heart, that she hadn't just built a business. She had woven herself into the very fabric of this town. She wasn't just protected by her success. She was protected by a community that clearly adored her. Later that day, nursing a coffee, I overheard two local men talking nearby. Khemjira has done more to bring life back to this street than anyone in the last 10 years, one said. She's a treasure, the other agreed. Put us back on the map. The words were a final, devastating confirmation of my new status. I was no longer the powerful one in our dynamic. I wasn't even an equal. Here, in the kingdom Khem had built from her own ashes, I was just a tourist, a stranger from a foreign land looking in from the outside.
Chapter 8. A Crisis of Capital. The weather turned on a dime. One moment, the sun was casting long afternoon shadows. The next, the sky had bruised to a violent shade of purple-gray. My phone, and every phone in the cafe, began to buzz with a coordinated shrill alert. A tropical storm, upgraded to a level 3 warning, was barreling towards the coast, set to make landfall by nightfall. The locals began to move with a practiced efficiency, securing awnings and boarding up windows. My eyes, as always, were on the gallery across the street. The lights were on, and I could see frantic movement inside. Khem's staff were carefully taking smaller canvases off the walls, moving them upstairs. It was the calm, controlled response of a professional. But my attention was drawn to the gallery's magnificent centerpiece, the sculpture I had heard the locals refer to as the Ascendant. It was a towering, twisting spire of polished bronze and reclaimed steel, a piece so audacious and beautiful it seemed to defy gravity. It was also, I knew from my eavesdropping, on loan from a world-renowned artist, and insured for a sum that could buy half this town. And it wasn't moving. Through the glass, I saw Khem stride into view. The cool, collected gallery owner was gone. This Khem was a general at war. She was on her phone, pacing, one hand gesturing angrily at the sculpture. Even from across the street, I could see the tension in the set of her jaw. She hung up, her face pale, and immediately turned to her sharp-eyed assistant, who was also on a call, shaking her head with frantic negation. This was more than a storm drill. This was a crisis. I watched as Khem walked to the sculpture, placing a hand on its cold metal base. She looked up at its impossible height, her shoulders slumping in a gesture of pure, unadulterated despair. In that single, unguarded moment, the mask of the untouchable businesswoman shattered. I saw the woman I knew underneath, overwhelmed, terrified, and alone. My instincts, honed by years of corporate crisis management, took over. I threw some bills on the cafe table and walked out into the now howling wind. Rain was beginning to fall in thick, angry drops. I didn't hesitate. I pushed open the heavy glass door to the Khemjira gallery. The atmosphere inside was one of controlled panic. Her assistant was arguing into her phone. "What do you mean not until Monday? The storm is hitting tonight!" Khem turned as I walked in, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury at my intrusion. "Praenarin, what are you doing here? I don't have time for this." "The sculpture," I said, my voice cutting through the rising wind. "You can't move it." A raw, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Of course I can't move it. It weighs 2 tons. I need a specialized crane, which is unavailable, but don't worry," she added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's insured for an obscene amount of money." She turned away, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time since I'd arrived, and then she muttered the words that froze my blood. At least, it was supposed to be. There's a loophole, a force majeure, flood exclusion on loaned pieces.
If it's damaged, I'm ruined. The confession hung in the air between us, a raw, exposed nerve. Her reputation, her business, the entire empire she had built to protect herself was about to be washed away. She was looking at the sculpture, but she wasn't seeing art. She was seeing the anchor that was about to drag her under. My mind, a machine built for logistics and problem-solving, kicked into gear. "Forget the crane companies," I said, my voice steady and certain, commanding the room in a way that felt as natural as breathing. "They're useless. Tell me exactly how much it weighs and give me the schematics for the base." Khem stared at me, her expression of despair shifting to one of stunned confusion. "What? The loading bearing capacity of your mezzanine. I need to know it, now."
Chapter 9. An Unlikely Partnership. For a heartbeat, Khem just stared at me, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile the stammering, apologetic woman from the restaurant with the sudden commander-in-chief standing before her. "Are you insane?" she breathed. "There's no time to be anything else," I shot back, already pulling out my phone. The phone. The very instrument of my betrayal was now my only tool for redemption. "Get me your architect on the phone now." Perhaps it was the sheer force of my certainty. Perhaps it was the desperation in her own heart. Whatever the reason, something shifted. Khem's panic, while still present, was channeled. She snapped at her assistant, Mali. "Mali, get Kun Samsak on the line. Find the gallery blueprints. Go!" As Mali scrambled, I turned to Khem. "I need manpower, at least 10 strong men, and I need them 15 minutes ago." "This isn't Bangkok, Praenarin," she said, her voice strained. "I can't just summon a construction crew." "I'm not asking for a construction crew," I said, already dialing a number from my memory. "Kun Vichai, it's Praenarin. I have an emergency. Yes, in Pranbury. I need to source a heavy-duty block and tackle system, at least a 2-ton capacity, and every meter of industrial-grade rope and strapping you can find. No, delivery isn't an option. Find a local supplier, construction, shipping, I don't care, and tell them I'll pay triple. I need it here in 30 minutes. For the next half hour, the gallery became a command center. The storm raged outside, the wind howling a mournful song as rain lashed against the glass, but inside, a different kind of energy took over. Khem, seeing the cold logic of my plan, fell into step. She became my lieutenant, her local knowledge proving just as valuable as my corporate contacts. While I was on the phone with my father's logistics chief, confirming the load-bearing limits of reinforced concrete, Khem was rallying the troops, her voice firm and clear as she directed a small, soaking wet army of fishermen who had materialized at the door. We worked side by side, a blur of frantic, focused energy. Our old, easy rhythm, the one we had when we assembled furniture in our first apartment, resurfaced under the immense pressure. I'd point to a structural beam, and she would already be directing her team to secure a pulley. She'd shout a concern about the sculpture's delicate patina, and I'd already be telling the men where to place the protective padding. The walls between us, of anger, of success, of hurt, seemed to dissolve, replaced by the shared, singular goal of survival. For the first time in 6 months, she looked at me not with disappointment or cool disdain, but with a grudging, astonished respect. She was seeing the Rin she had first fallen for, the one who could solve any problem, conquer any challenge. Finally, with a collective, groaning effort from the men and the screech of protesting metal, the sculpture was lifted, swung, and lowered safely onto a reinforced pallet on the mezzanine, inches from the gallery's back wall. A ragged cheer went up. We were soaked, exhausted, and covered in grime. But we had done it. As Khem paid the fisherman, I stood catching my breath, my body aching. The storm was now a solid wall of water, making departure impossible. The lights flickered ominously. The gallery, our strange battleground, had just become our shelter. Khem walked back over to me, her composure completely gone, her hair plastered to her face.
she started, her voice hoarse. "How did you—" I said quietly, the words carrying a double meaning we both understood. "I solve problems, and I create them." The lights flickered again, and then died, plunging us into the near-total darkness. The roar of the storm, the only sound left in the world.
Chapter 10, The Midpoint, the Final Fight. Darkness fell like a curtain, absolute and suffocating. The only light was the frantic blue-white strobing of lightning through the tall windows, each flash illuminating the gallery in stark, ghostly relief. The roar of the storm was a physical pressure against the glass. Malie, Khem's assistant, let out a small, startled gasp. "Circuit breaker must have tripped," she said, her voice shaky. "I'll go check." The beam of her phone's flashlight cut a nervous path towards the back office, and then Khem and I were utterly alone. In the flash of lightning, I saw Khem's silhouette. She hadn't moved. Her shoulders were slumped, the exhaustion of the last hour finally settling on her. "We did it," I whispered, the words sounding small against the storm's fury. I thought she would agree. I expected a tired nod, a quiet thank you. Instead, in the next flash of lightning, I saw her face turn towards me, her expression unreadable. "You want to know why I really left, Praenarin?" Her voice, when it came, was stripped of all its recent power. It was thin, frayed, and terribly quiet, yet it cut through the thunder with ease. "It was our anniversary," she began, and the memory slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The fancy restaurant downtown, the 2-month waiting list, the dress I'd bought her. "You remember it," she stated, not a question. "You wore that dark blue suit I loved. I was wearing the burgundy silk. I had your gift in my purse, a first edition copy of your favorite book of poetry I'd spent months hunting down." A flash of lightning illuminated a single glistening track down her cheek. "We had just ordered dessert when your phone rang. I saw the name, Pry. I watched your face change, that familiar look of concern, of duty. You said, 'I'm so sorry, Khem, it's an emergency, I have to go.'" Her voice cracked on the last word. "It was our 3rd anniversary, Rin, and you left me. You left me sitting alone at a table for 2, with a cake on the way and a useless gift in my bag, to go solve another one of her self-inflicted crises." The memory roared to life in my mind, my sanitized version crumbling under the weight of her truth. I had told myself it was unavoidable, that I'd made it up to her later, but I never saw this part. I never let myself see it. "I sat there for 20 minutes, she whispered, her voice thick with a humiliation that felt brand new. The waiter kept looking at me with pity. I paid the bill, took a taxi home, and packed a bag. That's when I knew. I knew that my greatest celebration would always be less important than her smallest problem. I would always be the one left waiting at the table. She finally turned to face me fully, her eyes dark pools of pain in the strobing light. "I didn't build all of this." She swept a hand through the dark, indicating the empire around us. "Because I'm a good businesswoman. I built this because I had to create a world so full, so successful, and so demanding that my peace could never again be shattered by your ex's next phone call." Her confession was a final, devastating blow. "I left," she said, her voice dropping to its lowest, most heartbreaking point, "because I knew I deserved to be someone's first choice, not a consolation prize." The storm outside raged on, but the true devastation was here, in the dark, silent space between us. The word sorry felt like a grain of sand against a mountain of debt. For the first time, I truly understood. I hadn't just broken her heart, I had fundamentally devalued her, and everything she had built since was a testament to that single, catastrophic failure.
Chapter 11. The Aftermath. The silence that followed her confession was more profound than the darkness. Her words hung in the air, each one a shard of glass I had forced her to swallow. The storm, which had been the focus of our panic, faded into a dull, distant roar. The real crisis was here, in the wreckage of our past laid bare on the gallery floor. I had no defense, no explanation. Every excuse I had ever made, every justification I had clung to, was revealed as a selfish lie in the face of her raw, unfiltered pain. My throat was tight with unspoken, inadequate apologies. So I said the only thing that felt true. "I am so sorry, Khem," I whispered, my voice breaking. The words were not enough. They would never be enough, but they were all I had. I was a coward, and I was wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. I didn't expect a response. I didn't deserve one. I simply stood there in the dark, letting her see the complete and utter demolition of my pride. The truth had finally burned it all away. Malie returned, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "The main breaker is fried. No one can get out here to fix it until the storm passes. We're stuck." The news, which would have sent me into a panic an hour ago, barely registered. I was already stuck in the prison of my own making. Khem, however, stirred. She took a deep, shaky breath, the CEO resurfacing by sheer force of will. "All right," she said, her voice still fragile, but regaining a sliver of its command. "Malie, there are emergency lanterns in the bottom drawer of my desk, and a first aid kit. Praenarin, you're bleeding." I looked down. In the chaos of moving the sculpture, a piece of metal had sliced a long, shallow gash along my forearm. I hadn't even felt it. In the soft, warm glow of the battery-powered lanterns, the atmosphere shifted. The cavernous gallery felt smaller, more intimate. Khem directed Malie to a storeroom to find blankets, then turned to me with the first aid kit. She gestured for me to sit on a low bench. "Give me your arm," she said, her tone clinical. I obeyed without a word. She knelt before me, her touch professional as she cleaned the cut with an antiseptic wipe. I flinched, not from the sting, but from the simple, forgotten intimacy of her proximity. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, the same way it used to be when she was working on a delicate piece of pottery. For a moment, we were just two people in a storm, one tending to the other's wound. The silence was no longer accusatory. It was heavy with unspoken thoughts. As she wrapped the bandage, her fingers brushed against my skin. It was the first gentle touch between us in 6 months. A current, faint but undeniable, passed between us. Her hand stilled for a fraction of a second. When she looked up, her eyes met mine, and the professional mask was gone. In its place was a deep, soul-crushing sadness, but also something else, a flicker of the woman who had once loved me, seeing the genuine, absolute remorse in my gaze. Chapter 12. A step forward, a step back. We didn't sleep. Trapped by the storm, we spent the long hours of the night as tentative guardians of the art, of the gallery, of the fragile truce that had settled between us. Malie, sensing the delicate shift in the air, made herself scarce,
dozing in Khem's office. We sat on opposite ends of a leather sofa, the emergency lantern casting long, dancing shadows on the wall. We talked. At first, the conversation was stilted, focused on neutral topics, the artists she represented, the challenges of running a business. But slowly, tentatively, the walls began to crumble. I didn't offer excuses. I simply owned my failures. I told her about the hollow echo in the apartment, about the soulless routine of my life, about the realization that my loyalty to Pry wasn't strength, but a profound weakness. She listened without interruption, and in turn, she spoke. Not with the detached analysis of her dinner presentation, but with feeling. She told me about the terror of her first solo business loan, the exhilaration of her first big sale, the pride she felt when she hung her own name above the door. She talked about the community she had found here, the sense of belonging she had built for herself. For the first time, I was seeing the full picture. I was seeing the brave, resilient woman she had been forced to become because of me. A profound, aching respect bloomed in my chest, intertwined with the shame. As dawn approached, the storm began to recede, its roars softening to a distant grumble. A pale, gray light began to filter through the windows, illuminating the quiet aftermath. "You have built something incredible here, Khem," I said, my voice filled with a sincerity that was impossible to fake. She looked at me, a real, unguarded look. A ghost of her old soft smile touched her lips. She said, "I had to." It felt like a breakthrough. A small, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in the wasteland of my heart. We were on the verge of something. Forgiveness, understanding, perhaps even a new beginning. We were two survivors, looking at each other in the dawn of a new day. And in that quiet, hopeful moment, a sound, more jarring than the loudest clap of thunder, shattered the peace. It was the unmistakable buzz of a phone call. My phone, lying on the bench across the room. The screen lit up, casting a pale, intrusive glow. And from across the room, we could both read the name. Pry.
Chapter 13. The Ghost Calls. The sound was an obscenity. After the primal roar of the storm and the profound, healing silence that followed, the electronic buzz of my phone was a vulgar intrusion. It was the sound of the outside world, the world I had failed in, crashing into the fragile sanctuary we had inadvertently created. We both froze. The soft, gray dawn light had just begun to promise a new day, chasing the last of the shadows from the corners of the gallery. Khem's small, tired smile still lingered on her lips, a fragile blossom of hope I had been desperate to nurture. We were perched on the edge of a breakthrough, a shared understanding forged in darkness and confession. And then, the phone rang. It lay on the low bench across the room where I had left it, a sleek black rectangle of dormant trouble. Now it vibrated against the wood, a persistent, demanding summons. The screen lit up, casting a pale, sickly glow in the dim light. Neither of us had to move. From where we sat on the sofa, the name was perfectly, horribly clear. Pry. The name hung in the air between us, as loud and as devastating as a gunshot. It was a grenade tossed into the quiet peace we had so carefully built over the long hours of the night. Every vulnerable confession, every shared glance, every moment of tentative forgiveness, it all seemed to vaporize in an instant. Khem's smile didn't just vanish. It was annihilated. The fragile warmth in her eyes was extinguished, replaced with the familiar, soul-deep weariness. It was the look of a woman seeing her worst fears realized,
a confirmation of a truth she had desperately, for a few short hours, allowed herself to forget. Her face became a mask of quiet devastation. She didn't look angry. She looked defeated, as if the last ounce of fight had just been drained from her. I stared at the phone, my heart seizing in my chest. A wave of cold, nauseating panic washed over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the phone into a million pieces. I wanted to turn back time by 30 seconds, to a moment when hope was still possible. The buzzing continued, relentless and unforgiving. It was the sound of a ghost, calling from a past I had sworn was behind me, proving it was still very much alive. And it was demanding an answer.
Chapter 14. The Dark Night of the Soul. Panic is a clumsy architect. It builds terrible ideas on foundations of fear. My panicked mind constructed a single, flawed plan. Answer the phone, shut it down quickly, and prove to Khem that it meant nothing. It was a fool's errand, an attempt to defuse a bomb by picking it up while the fuse was still lit. My body moved before my brain could protest. I scrambled across to the bench, my movements jerky and graceless. Khem watched me, her expression utterly still, her eyes wide with a dreadful, waiting silence. She was the judge, and this was the final piece of evidence. I swiped to answer, my thumb trembling. Now is not a good time, I said, my voice coming out as a harsh, strained whisper. Rin? Thank God! I've been so worried. I heard about the storm and... Pry's voice was a familiar cascade of frantic energy, the sound that had been the soundtrack to so many of my past mistakes. I'm fine. I cut her off, my eyes darting to Khem. Everything is fine. I have to go. But Rin, listen, last night was a disaster. My landlord is... And there it was. The crisis. The hook. The reason she always called. My old toxic habits kicked in like muscle memory. My voice, betraying me completely, softened with a wave of ingrained, misplaced responsibility. Pry, listen, I said, my tone shifting from dismissive to accommodating. I can't talk right now, but I'll call you back when I can, okay? Just take a breath. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. The two words were a death sentence. I hung up, turning back to Khem with a desperate, pleading look on my face. See, it was nothing. I told her I couldn't talk. But it was too late. The damage wasn't in the content of the call. It was in the act itself. It was in the softening of my voice. It was in the reflexive, damning promise of we. Khem's face, which had been a mask of stoic disappointment, simply crumpled. It was the slow, silent collapse of a structure that had no more strength to stand. Her shoulders slumped, and a look of profound, absolute heartbreak washed over her features. The last glimmer of hope in her eyes died, and all that was left was the flat, gray ash of defeat. I can't do this, she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. She shook her head slowly, not in anger, but in a gesture of deep, final sorrow. It was the gesture of a person accepting a fate they had fought desperately to avoid. I really thought you... She started, her voice catching. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have to. I had heard it in the quiet hours of the night. I really thought you had changed. She finally met my gaze, and her eyes were filled with a terrible, quiet finality. I see now that you will never let her go. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. Khem, no, that's not it, I swear. Please don't, she said, raising a hand to stop my pathetic excuses. Don't lie to me, and don't lie to yourself. Not anymore. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself, a mirror of that last night in our apartment so many months ago. History, it seemed, was doomed to repeat itself. I need you to leave, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. It was worse than her anger. It was a flatline.
Leave the guest house key on the counter. And please, Praenarin, don't come back." She turned and walked towards her office, her back ramrod straight, her every step taking her further and further away from me. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound of absolute finality. I was left standing alone in the gray dawn light of her gallery, the phone still clutched in my hand. It felt impossibly heavy, a black mirror reflecting my own catastrophic failure. I had been given the ultimate test, and I just failed. Utterly. Irrevocably.
Chapter 15. The Choice. The walk from the gallery to my car was the longest journey of my life. Each step was a lead weight. I moved like an automaton, executing the last orders I had been given. I left the guest house key on the polished wooden counter, the small piece of metal making a sound of quiet finality. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into a world that had been washed clean. The air was cool and damp, carrying the clean scent of rain-soaked earth and the sea. The sun, finally breaking through the clouds, cast long, watery shadows down the street. It was a beautiful morning, a morning for new beginnings. The irony was a physical pain, a sharp twisting in my gut. My car sat where I had left it, its sleek, expensive lines looking absurdly out of place in this quiet coastal town. It was a vessel from another world, my world, a world of sterile apartments, corporate takeovers, and empty promises. It was my escape route. All I had to do was get in, turn the key, and drive away. I could be back in Bangkok by lunchtime, back in the numb comfort of my routine, where I could pretend the last 48 hours had been nothing more than a bad dream. I sank into the driver's seat, the cool leather a familiar comfort. My hand hovered over the ignition. This was it, the moment of surrender, the moment I accepted my defeat and retreated back to the life I deserved. But I didn't turn the key. My gaze fell on the phone, lying dark on the passenger seat. My ruin, my weakness. Khem's final words echoed in the silence of the car, a brand on my soul. "I see now that you will never let her go." Was she right? Was I so fundamentally broken that I was incapable of severing that tie? I picked up the phone, my thumb tracing the outline of the screen. For years I had told myself a comforting lie. I told myself my continued connection with Pry was an act of kindness. I was a good person, a loyal person, someone who didn't abandon people in their time of need. It was a cornerstone of my identity. And in that moment, in the crushing silence of my failure, I finally saw that lie for what it was. It was not kindness. Kindness would have been forcing Pry to find her own strength years ago. Kindness would have been protecting Khem's heart with the ferocity it deserved. No, this wasn't kindness. It was ego. It was the selfish, narcissistic need to be the hero, the savior, the one person who could fix everything. It was a weakness, masquerading as a virtue. And the price of that weakness, the cost of my ego, was Khem. It had cost me the only thing in my hollow life that had ever truly mattered. A strange cold clarity washed over me, displacing the hot agony of despair. Promises were useless. Words were meaningless. I had proven that. I couldn't go back into the gallery and tell Khem I would change. I had to show her. I had to perform an action so definitive, so absolute and irreversible that it would leave no room for doubt. It was time to burn the last bridge. It was time to finally make the last phone call. My devastation didn't vanish. My heartbreak didn't heal. But underneath it all, something new flickered to life. Not hope. It was something harder, colder, and far more necessary. It was resolve. I finally knew what I had to do.
Chapter 16. The Last Goodbye. I didn't get out of the car. I stayed right there in the driver's seat. the quiet interior of the vehicle becoming the operating theater for the painful surgery I was about to perform. My hands were surprisingly steady as I navigated to my contact list. My thumb hovered over Pry's name for a long moment, a silent eulogy for a chapter of my life I should have closed long ago. Then I pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, her voice a familiar whirlwind of anxiety. "Rin? Oh, thank goodness. Listen, I am so sorry to bother you. I know you said you were busy, but you won't believe what happened." "Pry?" I cut her off. My voice was calm, steady, and utterly devoid of the warmth she was used to. The sound of it surprised even me. It was the voice of a different woman. The torrent of words on her end stopped abruptly. "Rin? Is everything okay? You sound strange." "I'm calling to tell you that this is the last time we will ever speak," I said, each word precise and deliberate. There was no room for ambiguity. There was no space for misinterpretation. A stunned silence met my declaration. I could picture her perfectly, her brow furrowed in confusion, a wounded look entering her eyes. The part of me that was conditioned to soothe her, to fix her, screamed in protest. I ignored it. What are you talking about? Is this about Khem? Did you two have a fight?" "This isn't about a fight," I said, my voice unwavering. "This is about a choice. I love Khem, and my weakness, my inability to set this boundary with you, has hurt her for the very last time." "Your weakness? Rin, that's not fair. I needed you. You're my best friend." The familiar manipulation, the guilt-laden appeal to our shared history washed over me without effect. It was like watching a storm from behind reinforced glass. "No, Pry," I said, and for the first time the words were the absolute truth. "I was not your friend. I was your enabler. I was your safety net. And in being that for you, I failed the most important person of my life. That ends today. I cannot be your friend. I cannot be your safety net anymore." A torrent of pleading, of confusion, of anger began to pour from the phone. I let her speak, my eyes fixed on the elegant sign across the street, the Khemjira, my future, the future I had almost thrown away forever. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke my final words to her. "I truly wish you all the best, Pry. I hope you find the strength to stand on your own, but this is goodbye." I didn't wait for her reply. I pressed the red button on the screen, ending the call. The silence that rushed in was clean. It was pure. Then, with a few deliberate taps, I navigated back to her contact. My thumb hovered over the block button. This was the final, irreversible seal. With a steady hand, I pressed it. A profound, aching sense of loss washed over me, a grief for a friendship that had once been real. But underneath it was something far more powerful. It was the clean, sharp, and liberating feeling of finality. The ghost was gone. The tie was severed. The door to the past was not just closed, it was locked, bolted, and barricaded forever. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first true breath of my new life. Now I just had to see if I had a future to go with it.
Chapter 17. A Merger of Equals. I gave myself 60 seconds. 1 minute to let the finality of my choice settle into my bones, to gather the remnants of my courage. Then I got out of the car. Walking back into the gallery was the hardest thing I have ever done. The place was quiet now, Malie having discreetly vanished. Khem was standing by the large front window, her back to the door, staring out at the sea. She didn't turn when I entered. I knew she had heard me, but she gave no sign, her posture a rigid wall of dismissal. "Khem," I said, my voice quiet but steady. She didn't move. "I believe I asked you to leave, Praenarin." "You did," I acknowledged, "and I will. If, after I say what I have to say, you still want me to go, I will walk out that door and you will never see or hear from me again. I swear it." That seemed to get her attention. She turned slowly, her face pale and exhausted, her eyes holding no warmth, only a deep, weary caution. I didn't rush. I didn't plead. I simply stood my ground and told her the truth. For years, I told myself that my relationship with Pry was a sign of my kindness. I see now that it was a sign of my weakness. It was my ego, my need to be a savior. And there is nothing kind about an ego that costs you the person you love. I took a steadying breath, holding her guarded gaze. I just got off the phone with her. I told her that I love you and that my weakness had hurt you for the last time. I told her I could no longer be her friend or her safety net. I told her it was goodbye, and then I blocked her number. I saw a flicker in her eyes, a tiny, infinitesimal spark of something that wasn't despair. I'm not telling you this to earn a reward. There are no words or apologies that can undo the damage I've caused. I know that. I'm telling you this as a statement of fact, a report on an action that has been taken. The person who walked out of this gallery 20 minutes ago no longer exists. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the weight of my actions settle between us. Then, I took the final step. From my jacket pocket, I pulled out a folded piece of paper, the manila file my father had given me, which I had finally opened in the car. It contained a detailed summary of my personal liquid assets, separate from my family's corporate holdings. I walked forward and placed it gently on a low table between us. I know what you've built here, Khem. You built it to protect yourself from people like me. You built it on your terms. I have no right to ask to be a part of it. I paused, taking the ultimate risk. But I am answering anyway. This is not a handout. It is not an apology gift. This is a business proposal. Her eyes darted from my face down to the file, a confused frown forming on her brow. You have the vision, I said, my voice filled with the genuine awe I felt for her. You have the name, the talent, the soul. I have capital and a lifetime of experience in logistics, strategy, and expansion. I am formally proposing a merger. I want to invest in you, in the Khemjira. I want to be your partner, in the back office running the numbers so you can focus on what you do best. I'm not asking for a second chance at our past. I'm applying for a job in our future. I had laid all my cards on the table. My heart, my choice, my business proposal. There was nothing left. I had done everything I could. The rest was up to her. I stood before her, stripped bare of all my old defenses, and waited for the verdict.
Chapter 18. Forgiveness and a New Beginning. Khem's gaze flickered between the file on the table and my face, her mind clearly reeling. Her expression was a tumultuous sea of conflicting emotions, shock, mistrust, and beneath it all, a fragile, terrified hope that she was desperately trying to suppress. She had built her fortress so carefully, and I was standing at the gates, not with a battering ram, but with a blueprint for a new wing, asking to be let inside. She said nothing for a long, agonizing minute. I could see the internal war she was fighting. The part of her that had been hurt so deeply was screaming at her to reject me, to protect herself, to send me away before I could inflict any more damage. But the other part, the part that had survived the storm with me, the part that had seen my desperation and now my resolve, that part was listening. Slowly, she reached out a trembling hand and picked up the file. She didn't open it. She just held it, her fingers tracing the simple manila folder as if testing its reality. Her eyes were still fixed on mine, searching, probing for any hint of deceit, any echo of the person I used to be. You blocked her, she whispered, the words a statement of fact, not a question. She was testing the weight of the words, seeing how they felt in the air between us. Yes, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. And you're proposing a partnership? A merger of equals, I corrected softly. You are the asset, Khem. I'm just the capital. A single hot tear escaped her eye and traced a slow path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of surrender. The fortress walls, built of success and self-preservation, finally began to crumble. Her shoulders, which had been rigid with tension, slumped in relief. The cool, professional mask she had worn for months dissolved, revealing the raw, vulnerable, and beautifully strong woman beneath. "You idiot," she breathed, the words half a sob, half a laugh. She closed the distance between us in 2 quick steps. Her hands came up to frame my face, her touch both a question and an affirmation. She looked into my eyes, and for the first time since that horrible night 6 months ago, I saw the Khem I loved looking back at me, her gaze filled with a messy, complicated, and overwhelming love. "It was never about the money, Rin," she whispered, her thumbs gently brushing away the tears that were now freely streaming down my own face. "I know," I choked out. "It was about respect, about being chosen." "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes." And then she kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss born of storms and heartbreak and long, lonely nights. It was desperate and needy and full of the chaotic, raw emotion of our entire journey. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of reunion, of a new beginning built not on a flawless past, but on a hard-won, brutally honest present. It tasted of salt, of her tears and mine, and it was the most profound homecoming I had ever known. We clung to each other. 2 survivors in the quiet aftermath of a war, finally on the same side.
Chapter 19. A sweet romantic love scene. The kiss ended, but we didn't part. We stayed molded together in the center of her gallery, foreheads pressed against each other, our breathing ragged and synchronized. The outside world, with its storms and its demands, ceased to exist. Our entire universe had shrunk to this single, sacred point of contact. My hands, which had been clutching her waist with desperate strength, gentled. I slid them up her back, feeling the delicate shape of her spine, memorizing the feel of her beneath my palms, as if for the first time. "Let's go home," she whispered, her voice husky. She didn't lead me to a car. She led me upstairs. Her home was a stunning, light-filled loft apartment directly above the gallery, a seamless extension of the world she had built. It was filled with art, with books, with life. It was filled with her. And unlike my sterile apartment, it felt like a home. She led me into her bedroom, where the morning light streamed through a large window, illuminating the soft, rumpled linens of her bed. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness. There was only a deep, magnetic pull that had been denied for too long. She turned to face me, her eyes dark and full of a profound, soul-deep emotion. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a question of desire, but of certainty. She was asking if the ghosts were truly gone. I answered by gently taking her face in my hands. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I said, my voice thick with the truth of it. "There is only you, Khem. There will only ever be you." That was all she needed. Our clothes seemed to melt away, discarded without thought. This was not a frenzied, desperate act. It was a slow, deliberate rediscovery. Every touch was a reassurance, every kiss a promise kept. I traced the elegant line of her collarbone, the gentle curve of her hip, my fingers relearning the geography of the woman I loved. She, in turn, mapped the landscape of my skin, her touch a balm on wounds I didn't even know I carried. When we finally came together, it was with a collective sigh of homecoming.
It was a slow, deep, and impossibly tender joining, a physical manifestation of our emotional merger. Every movement was a conversation, a silent dialogue of love and forgiveness. I looked into her eyes, seeing my own reflection there, and whispered the words that had been trapped in my heart for so long. I love you. She knew. She breathed it as her voice caught. She loved me too. She never stopped. She knew exactly what I meant. Our phones were silent, and all the ghosts were gone. We made love with the patience of people who had an entire lifetime to explore each other. A sweet, languid dance that was as much about healing the soul as it was about pleasing the body. It was a celebration of a love that had been tested, broken, and had somehow miraculously found its way back, stronger and more precious than ever before.
Chapter 20. The New Normal. 6 months later. 6 months, 182 days, 4,368 hours. The numbers are the same, but they no longer represent a loss. Now, they're the foundation of our new life, a testament to the time we have spent rebuilding, not just a relationship, but an empire. I stand in the newly expanded wing of the Khemjira, a space that is now officially known as the Praenarin wing for contemporary sculpture, a detail Khem insisted on, much to my embarrassment and secret pride. The afternoon sun streams through the skylights I helped design, illuminating a new collection from a promising young artist Khem discovered. My phone buzzes in my pocket, and I pull it out without a flicker of anxiety. The screen shows a calendar alert. Dinner with the Patels, 7 p.m. I tap dismiss and slide it back into my pocket. My phone is no longer a weapon. It's just a tool. A boring, practical, wonderful tool for a shared life. The investors from Singapore are on their way, I say, walking over to Khem, who is adjusting the lighting on a piece. They're 5 minutes out. She doesn't look up, her brow furrowed in artistic concentration. Good. Let them see it properly. She straightens up, dusting off her hands, and turns to me. The cool, powerful gallery owner is still there, but now her gaze is reserved for me alone, and it is endlessly warm. How do I look? She is wearing a simple, elegant navy dress, and she looks like the queen of her entire universe. Like you're about to make us an obscene amount of money, I say with a grin. She laughs, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged space. It's my favorite sound in the world. She walks over and straightens my tie, a simple, domestic gesture that feels more intimate than any corporate merger. And you, my love, she whispers, her eyes sparkling, look like the woman who makes it all possible. Later that evening, after a successful meeting and a celebratory dinner, we find ourselves walking hand in hand along the beach, the sand cool beneath our bare feet. The sea is calm, its gentle rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the vibrant, busy life we lead. We found our balance. Khem is the soul and the vision. I am the strategy and the foundation. Together, we are unstoppable. She leans her head on my shoulder as we walk. Do you ever think about that day? The storm? I think about it every day, I admit without shame. I think about how close I came to losing everything that mattered. She stops, turning to face me in the soft moonlight. She takes my hands in hers, her expression serious and full of a love that still takes my breath away. You didn't lose, Rin. You fought. You made the choice. Our past, it's not a ghost anymore. It's just the story of how we got here. And she is right. The angst, the pain, the terrible mistakes, they are no longer haunting specters. They are the scars that prove our love was tested by the fiercest of storms and did not break. It won. I look at the incredible woman standing before me, her gallery a shining beacon up on the shore, our shared legacy. I think of the cold, silent apartment I left behind and the vibrant, laughter-filled home that waits for us now.
My life used to be about managing risk and mitigating loss. Now it is about cultivating joy and maximizing love. The return on that investment I've found is infinite.